My name is Crystal Ramirez. I'm 23 years old, and I've been the disappointment in my family for as long as I can remember. Not because I ever did anything wrong, not because I was lazy, reckless, or irresponsible, but because I chose a life that didn't come with a fancy title, a corporate office, or something my parents could brag about at dinner parties. Growing up, I was the kid who liked fixing things. While other girls my age were glued to their phones, I was helping my uncle repair a broken gate or watching contractors work on our neighbors' houses. I loved the smell of sawdust, the satisfaction of turning raw materials into something solid and useful. By the time I was a teenager, I was already doing small repair jobs for people on our block, patching fences, fixing cabinets, building shelves. My parents hated it. To them, it wasn't ambition. It was a phase, a hobby, something I'd eventually grow out of once I got serious about my future. By 18, I was working full-time for a local contractor who taught me everything: woodworking, electrical basics, structural repairs, how to run jobs efficiently. 2 years later, I started my own business. Nothing flashy, just me, my tools, and a growing list of clients who trusted my work. And here's the part my parents never seemed able to process. I was doing really well. I charged $75 an hour. I was booked weeks in advance. I had no debt, a paid-off work truck, steady referrals, and enough savings that I could have moved out at any time. I wasn't scraping by. I wasn't struggling. But in my parents' eyes, I was always one bad month away from disaster. My mother constantly sent me job listings for real careers: office assistant positions, night classes, anything with a desk and a dress code. My father liked forwarding me articles about job security, always with a little note attached about planning for the future. Meanwhile, my younger brother, Daniel, 26, was everything I wasn't. College graduate, corporate job, clean-cut ambition. He worked in marketing for a big-name company in the city, or at least that's what everyone believed. He had a polished girlfriend, Sophie, and an Instagram feed that looked like a brochure for success: airport lounges, skyline views, trendy restaurants. Every family dinner turned into the Daniel show. "How's work, Daniel? Tell us about that client you're working with. Did you see the photos he posted? He's doing amazing." Then they'd turn to me with polite pity. "So, still fixing cabinets?" my uncle once asked, smiling like he was being kind. My mom laughed and said Crystal loves her little projects. Little projects. I once closed a 5-figure contract while she was saying that. The thing is, I could have corrected them. I could have told them how much I was earning, shown them my invoices, my calendar packed solid. But I learned early that it didn't matter. If it didn't fit their idea of success, count. What made it worse was knowing I wasn't even angry about the favoritism anymore. I was used to it. What hurt was the way they genuinely believed I was failing. The way my father introduced me to people as between careers. The way my mother talked about my future like something that hadn't started yet. The way everyone assumed Daniel was the one carrying the family pride. And then 2 years ago, I overheard something that changed everything. It was late. I was in the hallway when I heard my parents arguing in hushed voices. My father's work hours had been cut. Bills were piling up. They were behind on the mortgage. They were scared of losing the house I grew up in, the place where every memory lived. I had the money to help, plenty of it. But I also knew they would never accept it from me, not from their unsuccessful daughter who played with tools for a living. So I made a decision that would quietly define the next 2 years of my life. I set up automatic payments from my business account to cover their mortgage. Every month. $1,750. I made it look like it came from their retirement fund. They never noticed. For 2 years, I kept a roof over their heads while they lectured me about responsibility and praised Daniel for posting photos of airport lounges. And I stayed silent, because part of me still hoped that one day they'd finally see me. They didn't, and that was only the beginning. For 2 years, my life ran on 2 parallel tracks that never touched. On one side, I was the daughter my parents worried about, the one they thought was barely getting by, the one they nudged toward backup plans and something more stable. On the other side, I was the person quietly making sure their house didn't get taken by the bank. Every month, like clockwork, the mortgage payment went through from my business account. I watched the confirmation emails come in, deleted them, and went back to work. It became routine in the same way brushing your teeth does necessary, unremarkable, just part of life. What never became routine was the way my parents talked to me. My mother would hover in my workshop watching me sand cabinets or measure cuts and sigh dramatically. You know, she'd say this would all be easier if you had a job with benefits. My father would stand in the doorway, arms crossed, and ask questions that sounded supportive but weren't. So, how long do you think this thing will last? Like my entire career was a temporary fever. Meanwhile, Daniel remained untouchable. Every visit home came with stories about his big projects and important meetings. He talked in vague corporate language that sounded impressive but said very little. My parents never questioned it. Why would they? Daniel had the degree, the job title, the girlfriend who looked like she stepped out of a lifestyle ad. If he said things were going great, that was enough. I tried subtly to show my parents that I was doing well. Not to brag, just to close the gap between what they believed and what was real. I bought a high-quality watch, the kind you don't buy unless you're financially comfortable. My mother frowned and asked if it was really necessary. I took them out to dinner and paid the bill without comment. My father joked that I shouldn't blow all my savings in one night. For my mother's birthday, I booked her a luxury spa package. She loved it until she decided it proved I was irresponsible with money and needed guidance. It didn't matter what I did. Everything was filtered through the assumption that I was one step away from failure. What they didn't know, what made the whole thing feel surreal, was that their own financial stability depended on the very career they dismissed. And the longer it went on, the heavier the secret became. I didn't resent paying the mortgage. Not really. I loved my parents. I loved that house. I told myself I was doing the right thing. But there were moments, small, sharp moments, when the resentment slipped through. Like last Christmas, when my aunt asked Daniel about his exciting future while my cousin leaned over and whispered to me, "So, you hanging in there?" I smiled politely, knowing that earlier that week, I'd signed a contract for a kitchen remodel worth more than their annual salary. Or the time my mother suggested I look into studio apartments in less nice areas because she worried I couldn't afford anything better. I could have bought a house outright. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the loneliness of carrying the truth by myself. The only person who knew was my best friend Lucas, who helped me occasionally on bigger jobs. When I finally told him what I was doing, paying my parents' mortgage in secret, he stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Crystal," he said slowly, "you realize this is insane, right?" I told him it was temporary, that I just needed a little more time, that eventually things would balance out. He didn't look convinced. "They don't respect you," he said, "and you're rewarding that." I brushed it off. It was easier than admitting he might be right. What really started messing with my head, though, was Daniel. At first, it was just a feeling, something off. Daniel had always been consistent with his online presence, locations tagged, office selfies, weekend trips with Sophie. His life looked like a highlight reel. Then the cracks started showing. He stopped tagging locations. The captions became vague. "Busy day with the team. Big things coming. No details. No context." One night I noticed something strange. He posted a photo of a skyline view from what he claimed was his office. I recognized it instantly, not because I'd been there, but because I'd seen it on a real estate listing while browsing apartments. It was a stock photo. I told myself I was overthinking it. But then his visits home became less frequent. When he did show up, he avoided talking about work. The guy who used to monologue about campaigns and clients suddenly had nothing to say. Sophie changed too. She used to be confident, chatty, perfectly in sync with Daniel's success story. The last time they visited together, she looked tense. When my father asked Daniel for investment advice, Daniel dodged the question, muttering something about confidentiality. Sophie stared at the floor. Later that night, I heard them arguing outside. "You can't keep doing this," Sophie hissed. "It's getting out of control." "Just give me more time," Daniel snapped back. When they noticed me, they both smiled like nothing happened. After that, I couldn't stop noticing things. Daniel always forgot his wallet when we went out. His expensive car was in the shop for months. He started borrowing my mother's car when he visited. The designer clothes disappeared. He reused old photos online with new captions. When my parents asked him for small favors, help covering a bill, lending a little cash, he always had an excuse. Accounts tied up, payment cycles, investments pending. They believed him every time. I tried to gently raise concerns. "Doesn't Daniel seem stressed lately?" I asked once. My mother shut it down immediately. Real careers come with real pressure. Not everyone can just tinker in a garage and call it work. That comment landed harder than she knew. Because while she was defending Daniel's imaginary stress, I was carrying the real one, running a growing business, managing employees, and silently supporting the family. I started wondering if I was losing my mind. Was I just jealous, like my mother said? Was I imagining red flags because I'd spent my whole life being compared to him? So I did something I'd never done before. I checked. Nothing invasive, just public information. Daniel wasn't listed on his company's website. Sophie's firm didn't list her either. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't say a word. I waited. And all the while, my business kept growing. More contracts, bigger jobs, more money. And none of it mattered because in my parents' eyes, I was still the one who hadn't made it. I didn't know it yet, but the secret I'd been carrying, the one I thought I was controlling, was already starting to rot the foundation beneath all of us. And once it collapsed, nothing would be the same. After that night, I couldn't unsee the cracks. Once you notice one lie, the rest line up like dominoes. Daniel's life. This perfect, polished version my parents worshipped started to feel less like reality and more like a stage set. Everything looked solid from a distance, but up close, it was cardboard and tape. I didn't go looking for proof, it just kept presenting itself. He stopped staying overnight when he visited, said he had early meetings, deadlines, flights to catch, but there were no suit bags anymore, no laptop glued to his side, no frantic corporate calls in the kitchen like before. He spent more time scrolling on his phone, jaw, tight thumbs, moving fast, like he was constantly putting out invisible fires. Sophie barely spoke. She used to laugh easily, ask about my projects, compliment my work in a way that felt genuine. Now she sat quietly at the table, pushing food around her plate, eyes darting toward Daniel whenever my parents asked questions. "How's work, honey?" my mom asked her once. Sophie hesitated just a fraction of a second too long before answering, "Busy." That was it. No story, no enthusiasm. Daniel jumped in immediately. "Yeah, super intense right now. Big transition period." My parents nodded like that explained everything. I noticed the money stuff next. When we went out to eat, Daniel always reached for his pocket, patted around, then laughed. "Ah, left my wallet in the car again." The car he wasn't driving anymore. My mother covered the bill every time, beaming like she was doing him a favor. I watched him accept it without protest, without embarrassment. That alone felt wrong. Daniel hated looking dependent. His so-called luxury car sat in the shop for 3 straight months. He used my mother's sedan instead, claiming supply chain issues with parts. My father repeated that excuse to friends like it was fact. The biggest giveaway came when my parents started casually mentioning money Daniel had supposedly given them. Not large sums, a few hundred here, a utility bill there, emergency help. At least that's what they thought. My mother once said, "Thank goodness Daniel was able to help us out again last month." I asked how. She frowned. "Well, he said he transferred it. Then there was an issue. Then he said he'd mail a check. Then he paid the electric bill directly." She said it casually, like it was normal for money to disappear into thin air. But it wasn't normal. It was chaos disguised as generosity. I knew the bills. I saw the mail. I knew what was getting paid and what wasn't. And the truth hit me like a punch to the chest. My parents were depending on Daniel financially, while I was quietly covering their biggest expense. They thought they had 2 children helping them. They actually had one. I started feeling like I was watching a slow-motion disaster that no one else could see. Every time I tried to hint at it, my mother snapped back harder. "Stop projecting your insecurities onto your brother," she said once. "Not everyone struggles like you do." That sentence stayed with me. Struggles like you do. I was juggling multiple 6-figure contracts, planning to hire help, and keeping their house out of foreclosure. And yet somehow I was still the one struggling. I started keeping my mouth shut. Not because I didn't care, but because I realized something terrifying. Even if I showed them the truth, they might not believe it. That realization changed how I saw everything. Around the same time, my own life started getting heavier. My workload exploded. I hired a part-time helper to keep up. I was turning down jobs because there weren't enough hours in the day. I should have been proud. Instead, I was exhausted. Living under my parents' roof felt like living under a microscope where every success was minimized and every flaw magnified. I started waking up at 3 in the morning, replaying conversations in my head, wondering if I really was the problem. Was I enabling this by staying quiet? Was I complicit in Daniel's lies by not exposing them? Or was I protecting my parents from a truth they weren't ready to face? Lucas noticed the change in me before anyone else. "You're not sleeping," he said one afternoon while we were loading materials into the truck. "You're here, but your head isn't." I almost told him everything. Almost admitted that I felt like I was holding my family together with duct tape and silence. But before I could, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "We need to talk later." Those words used to mean dinner plans or errands. This time they felt like a warning. I didn't know it yet, but my silence was about to cost me more than sleep. Because while I was watching Daniel's story unravel from the sidelines, my mother was already deciding that I was the real problem. And she was done waiting for me to grow up. The conversation my mother said we needed to have didn't happen later that night. It happened the next afternoon, unannounced, intrusive, and perfectly timed to cause damage. I was in my workshop behind the house finishing the final measurements on a custom cabinet set for a high-end client. This was a serious job, the kind that could lead to repeat work and referrals in circles my parents loved bragging about, if only they'd acknowledged what I actually did. I was focused, centered, calm. Then my mother walked in. She didn't say hello. She just stood there watching me work, arms crossed, lips pressed thin. That alone was enough to put me on edge. She never came into the workshop unless she had something to say, and it was never something good. She started with a sigh. "You know," she said, "your father and I have been talking." I kept working, pretending not to notice the warning signs. "Times are hard right now," she continued. "The economy is terrible. Everyone is feeling the pinch." I nodded, still standing, waiting for the real point to land. "And we think," she said carefully, "that it would be good for you to start contributing to the household expenses." My hand slipped. The sander scraped too hard against the wood, leaving a mark I knew I'd have to fix. I shut the machine off slowly and turned to face her. "Contributing how I asked, even though I already knew." "Rent," she said. "Just something reasonable. You're an adult now." I stared at her, my brain scrambling to catch up. I was 23 years old, running a profitable business, paying their entire mortgage every single month. And she was asking me for rent. I took a breath, trying to stay calm. "Mom, I'm saving to move out. It doesn't make sense for me to pay rent when I could put that money toward my own place." The look she gave me was sharp enough to cut. "So after everything we've done for you," she said, voice rising, "this is how you repay us." "Everything." I almost laughed. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning in my chest for years. "Why aren't you asking Daniel?" Her face changed instantly. She stuttered, eyes darting, then recovered. "Daniel has real expenses. He's building a career. He can't just throw money around like you." "Like you." As if my money came from nowhere. She added, "Besides, he's already helped us several times." That's when I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. The sound echoed in the workshop, loud and ugly. My mother's face twisted with rage. "You've always been jealous of your brother," she snapped. "If you'd applied yourself instead of wasting time with power tools, maybe you wouldn't feel so bitter." That was the moment I almost told her everything. The mortgage, the payments, the sacrifices. The words were right there, but something stopped me. Maybe pride. Maybe exhaustion, or maybe I just wanted to see how far she was willing to go before reality finally forced itself into the room. So instead I said, "Fine. Ask Daniel for the rent money. Let's see what happens." She stormed out like I'd insulted her very existence. And that was when things escalated from disrespect to outright sabotage. It started small. Client emails disappeared from the family computer emails, tied to jobs worth thousands. When I confronted my mother, she claimed she was just clearing spam. Then the internet mysteriously stopped working. My entire business ran online. Client communication, invoices, supply orders. My mother shrugged and said she'd canceled the service because we need to cut unnecessary expenses. I had to run my business off my phone for a week. Then came the intervention. She invited my uncle, some middle management corporate hero, to lecture me about wasted potential and responsibility. I left halfway through to go give an estimate on a 6-figure renovation. No one noticed the irony. The final straw came when she opened my mail. A thank you card from a client, $200 in cash inside. She took it. When I confronted her, she said it was to cover groceries. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight, my mind racing. I wasn't just being disrespected anymore. I was being punished for not fitting the story she wanted to tell about me. And for the first time since I started paying their mortgage, I realized something terrifying. Love shouldn't cost this much. By the time my mother crossed from criticism into sabotage, I was already running on fumes. I changed my routines quietly, got a P.O. box so she couldn't intercept my mail anymore, moved my important files into a fireproof safe, backed up every client contact and invoice to the cloud. I started locking my workshop door, something I'd never felt the need to do before. Living in my parents' house began to feel like living under siege. Every morning, I woke up wondering what small, destructive choice my mother would make next, under the excuse of helping me grow up. Meanwhile, Daniel was disappearing. My parents called him constantly. He answered less and less. When he did, it was always rushed, vague, scheduled, around some imaginary meeting. My mother made excuses for him without being asked. "He's under so much pressure. He's doing such important work. He just needs time." I watched the worry creep into her eyes, even as she refused to admit anything was wrong. My father started pacing more, asking questions when my mother wasn't around. "Do you think Daniel's really okay?" he asked once quietly. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed. That was the night everything finally collapsed. I was in the workshop finishing paperwork when I heard my mother answer her phone. Her voice was bright, at first too bright.
Hi, sweetheart.
I didn't pay attention until her tone changed. Confusion, then disbelief, then something close to panic. I stepped closer to the door. She wasn't talking to Daniel. She was talking to Sophie. I couldn't hear Sophie's side of the conversation, but my mother's responses told the whole story. That can't be right. There must be a mistake. He would have told us. No, that doesn't make sense. Her voice broke. When the call ended, she didn't move. She just stared at the phone in her hand like it had betrayed her. She looked up and saw me standing there. That was Sophie, she said, barely above a whisper. She and Daniel broke up. I waited. She swallowed hard. She says Daniel lost his job over a year ago. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. He's been pretending to go to work, maxing out credit cards, lying to everyone. I felt no triumph, no relief. Just a deep, aching sadness for my brother and for how predictable this all was. My father came home an hour later. He didn't believe it at first. Said Sophie must be exaggerating. But as my mother repeated what she'd heard, I saw his certainty crumble. They called Daniel over and over, voicemail after voicemail. He never picked up. That night, the house felt hollow, like the walls themselves were listening. The next morning, my mother looked older. She sat at the kitchen table in yesterday's clothes, eyes swollen from crying. My father paced phone glued to his ear. Finally, my mother looked at me. "We need your help," she said. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement. A request. She told me everything about their finances, my father's reduced pension medical bills they'd hidden, how close they were to losing the house. "Daniel's been helping us," she said weakly. Or at least we thought he was. She mentioned missed transfers, unpaid bills, excuses that suddenly made sense. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "We're 3 months behind on the mortgage." I stared at her. "No," I said quietly. "You're not." She frowned. "The bank sent a notice yesterday." "That's not possible," I said. "The mortgage is current." She looked confused. "How would you know that?" And there it was. The moment I'd been carrying for 2 years. I took a deep breath. "Because I've been paying it," I said. "Every month. For 2 years." The silence that followed was absolute. My father's phone slipped from his hand and hit the floor. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. What she whispered. I told them everything. The overheard conversation, the automatic payments, the $40,000 I'd quietly funneled into keeping their home standing. When I finished, my mother started crying again, but these tears were different. Shock, guilt, fear. My father asked, "Why didn't you tell us?" I met his eyes. "Would you have believed me?" I asked. Neither of them answered. They knew the truth. And in that moment, as the lie finally collapsed, I realized something that hurt more than anything else. Even now, even after everything, they were still trying to decide how to feel about me. And that told me all I needed to know. After the shock wore off, the house filled with noise again. My mother kept saying my name like she was trying to convince herself I was real. My father paced the kitchen, rubbing his temples, muttering numbers under his breath, as if the math might somehow undo what I'd just told them. $40,000. More, actually. But I didn't correct him. My mother finally looked at me and said, "We had no idea you were doing so well." Successful, she meant. She just couldn't quite bring herself to say the word. My father cleared his throat. "Your business. It must be more serious than we thought." I nodded. It's been serious for a long time. There was a long, uncomfortable pause where I waited for something else. An apology, regret, even acknowledgement of the way they'd treated me. It never came. Instead, my mother wiped her eyes and said, "We need to figure out what to do about Daniel." Of course. She launched into it like this revelation about me was just a side note. Daniel was struggling. Daniel was overwhelmed. Daniel had lost his way. We needed to be understanding, supportive, united as a family. I sat there listening, something inside me slowly going numb. They talked about how they could help him get back on his feet. Credit counseling, temporary living arrangements. Maybe he could come home for a while. Maybe I could help him find work since I knew people. I almost laughed. Not once did they say, "We're sorry." Not once did they say, "We were wrong about you." They praised me in vague, careful ways. How resourceful I was, how handy my skills had turned out to be. Like my success was an accident they'd stumbled upon. At some point, my mother reached across the table and touched my hand. "We're proud of you," she said. But it sounded rehearsed, like something she thought she was supposed to say. I told them I'd keep paying the mortgage for now. I didn't want them to lose the house, not after everything. They nodded quickly, relief washing over their faces. That relief told me more than any words could. I wasn't their daughter in that moment. I was their solution. The conversation ended with plans about Daniel's lists of phone calls to make steps to take when he finally answered. They were already rewriting his story, turning lies into stress deception, into pressure, failure, into misfortune. By the time I went back to my room, my chest felt tight. Nothing had changed. They knew the truth now. They knew I was the one who'd been responsible, stable, quietly holding everything together. And still Daniel was the center of gravity. 3 days later, he finally called. He didn't come home. He cried to my mother over the phone, telling his version of events, how the industry was toxic, how his company had set him up to fail, how debt had spiraled out of control. My parents absorbed it all. They told him it would be okay, that they understood, that everyone makes mistakes. I stood in the hallway listening to my mother comfort him, and something inside me finally settled. Not anger, acceptance. They weren't going to change. They couldn't. The version of me they carried in their heads was fixed no matter what I did or proved. That night I called Lucas. "I'm done," I said. He didn't ask with what. The next morning I found an apartment across town. Small, modest, with a detached garage that would work perfectly as a workshop. I put down a deposit that same day. I didn't tell my parents. I already knew how that conversation would go. I moved out on a Saturday morning while my parents were at a meeting with the bank. I didn't announce it. I didn't ask permission. I didn't leave room for negotiations or guilt or one more round of, "We just want what's best for you." I worked quietly. Lucas helped me load my tools first. Every saw, every case, every piece of equipment I'd slowly built my livelihood around. Watching them disappear into the truck felt like reclaiming parts of myself that had been shrinking for years. Then came my personal things: clothes, books, the few sentimental items I actually cared about. I left the rest. It wasn't worth carrying memories that only ever made me feel small. Before I left, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a note. Not angry, not dramatic, just factual. I explained that I'd made the mortgage payment one last time to give them space to breathe, not to save them indefinitely. I told them I was done living in a house where my work was mocked, my privacy violated, and my value ignored. I included printouts of every mortgage payment I'd made over the past 2 years, neatly highlighted, impossible to dismiss. At the bottom, I wrote one final line. "Now you know which child was actually responsible. Please don't contact me until you're ready to apologize for how you treated me." I placed the note on the table, took one last look at the house I'd protected in silence for so long, and walked out. The fallout was immediate. My phone lit up before I'd even reached my new apartment. Missed calls, voicemails, texts layered with panic and guilt and sudden affection. My mother cried, said they never meant to hurt me, said they were just trying to push me to reach my potential. My father sent a message saying they were sorry if I felt unappreciated. If I felt, I didn't respond. Daniel showed up at the house a week later, according to family friends. He told everyone he'd had a breakdown from working too hard, that he was reassessing his priorities. Somehow, even after everything, he managed to turn failure into a story about self-discovery. My parents accepted it without question. Of course they did. As for me, my life got quieter, cleaner. My new place wasn't impressive, but it was mine. No passive-aggressive comments, no sabotage, no explaining myself. I hired my first full-time employee a month later, booked more jobs than ever, built something solid without an audience demanding I prove its worth. And for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to earn approval from people who were determined never to give it. I'm still the family disappointment, but now I understand something I didn't before. Being a disappointment is only painful when you care about disappointing people who refuse to see you clearly. Once you stop, it's incredibly freeing.